Welcome to Capital Preview, brought to you by Mediacom.
Welcome to Capital Preview, the COVID-19 edition. My name is Bill Peard. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Iowa Cable and Telecommunications Association. And Capital Preview is brought to you by Mediacom. And our guests today are Representative Chris Hall, District 13. He's a Democrat from Sioux City. And our other guest is Senator Charles Schneider, President of the Iowa Senate, District 22, and he represents West Des Moines, Waukee, Clive, and Windsor Heights as a whole. So welcome, you guys, and we appreciate you guys coming in or not into the studios. We're doing this obviously like the whole world is being legislated through their offices. So. But we appreciate you guys taking your time out, and this is going to be, as always, just kind of a conversation. And I'm going to ask you, Charles. I got a couple personal questions for you for your big news of retirement. And what made you decide not to seek re-election?
Oh, for me, it really came down to wanting to spend more time with family and focusing on my career. I never wanted to be, a career state legislator. The reality, and I have enjoyed a lot of what I've been able to help accomplish since I've been in the state Senate. I mean, we've seen some historic things done, including tax reform and tort reform, and just a whole host of different areas that we've been able to make some progress on. And the reality, though, is that being a legislator is a part-time position. And a lot of us have jobs outside of our state legislative duties, myself included. I work full-time outside of being in the legislature. And when you do that, then you limit your growth within your full-time job. So, after a certain point in time, I just came to the realization that I wanted to focus more of my time on my career and on my family, and move forward from there.
Very good. Looking back at your time in the Iowa Senate, what would you say has been your biggest accomplishment?
I think the income tax relief and reform bill that we passed 2 years ago or 3 years ago now is a really significant accomplishment. For too long, our state's business tax climate has been uncompetitive. And we've ranked everywhere from 40th to 42nd or 43rd, I think, since I've been in the legislature. And a big reason for that is we have an uncompetitive tax structure. So what we did with our bill in terms of broadening the base and lowering the rates for income tax for individuals and for businesses is really going to position our state in a more competitive position. And we're already seeing some improvement in the tax foundation rankings, and we'll continue to see that too as our tax plan fully phases in.
What about any future political plans, Charles? You got anything down the line that you'd like to potentially reserve your free time for?
Well, I'm not going to move to Waukee and run for mayor now.
That job's filled anyway.
No, I don't have anything really planned. I'll keep my options open for something that comes along, but really I didn't run for office just to be an office holder. I ran to make a difference. And if I feel like I can do that in another capacity at some point down the road, I'll do it. But for right now, my focus is on my career and my family.
Well, we wish you well in your future endeavors. We're gonna now get into a situation with Representative Hall and you on it. This thing seems surreal. I mean, the way things have changed in 2 months has been unbelievable. That we are sitting there trying to grapple with what the new reality of our lives are, and certainly as it exists with the people that guide our state, the representatives and the senators. And so Chris, I'm going to ask you, the Sioux City area has had a spike in confirmed cases in recent days. Can you tell us what it looks like or what you've heard from your constituents in Sioux City?
Sure. I think it helps to kind of understand the landscape in Sioux City if you also watch the way that confirmed cases have come across the state. You know, Sioux City, we're on the east or the western edge of all of these counties that have kind of seen their numbers steadily climbing. And for a good chunk of time, we actually were very successful in being isolated. So really the timeline of confirmed cases spiking has just hit Sioux City in the last week or so. We've heard that a lot of it was centered in either food manufacturing or meat packing facilities, and we've had 2 or 3 different facilities that have confirmed cases, and some of them also have chosen to fully shut down and quarantine their employees. But when you have so many workers in a dense area, and you also have them going home at the end of the day and out into their community either to get groceries or take care of their children, you see those cases spread quickly. Unfortunately, Sioux City has just seen its numbers climb to the top of some metrics. You know, per capita population, we're one of the hot spots in the nation right now, and it's a big concern. I spent part of my weekend visiting with constituents who work in healthcare, and a couple of them have said that hospital beds are filling up quickly, and hospitalizations have doubled in Sioux City just in the last few days. Another thing to keep in mind for folks is we're right at the heart of a tri-state area, and so cases over in Nebraska and South Dakota, many of them are actually coming to hospitals in Sioux City right now, and keeping a hand on the data is it's a real challenge.
Hey, and Senator Schneider, what's been some of your experiences in your district that you represent with this COVID-19 situation?
Well, like everyone else, I'm adjusting to a new reality. My company is shut down as far as working from location, so we're all working from home. I've had to adapt to doing that. My wife is working from home as well. And though there are some obvious changes that we have to make there. I've had to cut my own hair, which I've done very poorly. And it sounds like I'm going to have to do that again, unfortunately.
It sounds like Senator or Representative Hall could use your hairstyling abilities.
I can use some tips if you've got them, yeah.
Put the clippers on 3 and go. That's my advice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had to make a lot of adjustments just like everyone else. And that's what we're all trying to do. And the governor's got a really challenging job of trying to make sure that we're adequately addressing the public health concerns while also making sure that we're not ruining someone's livelihood. And, you know, a lot of the relief comes through the form of federal aid, but a lot of the state regulations that the governor has passed have helped in a lot of areas in terms of easing regulations, allowing more people to serve on the front lines as healthcare workers and doing things like that. And the next obvious challenge is reopening the economy, when to do that, how to do it, what the best approach is, and still driving home the message that we need to adequately make sure that we're social distancing and taking adequate precautions.
So how about you, Representative Hall? Do you agree with the governor's announcement to begin opening malls, gyms, churches, and other real estate and other retail establishments on May 1st, which is this Friday, right?
I think, you know, I listened to the governor's press conference this morning and immediately started getting emails and Facebook messages from constituents. I think there's a lot of concern with opening some businesses even in certain parts of the state on May 1st. And the feedback that I'm hearing most immediately is that May 1st is just too early. We right now are still seeing confirmed cases climb each day in the state. We haven't had a single day where they've declined. And we're also seeing hospitalizations continue to increase. By all measurable data, we are still nowhere near the guidelines that the CDC has recommended for a state to consider reopening its economy. If you talk about the protective care that we have for healthcare workers or the hospitalization rates and the counts in our state, I think that this would be a decision we might consider in a few weeks' time, but not in the moment where we're still seeing cases climb. I think that the governor would do well to be a little bit more transparent with the data she's using to make this decision, because that's also something that was not presented in her press conference today.
The pandemic will clearly impact the state's budget.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a sense how much this will impact, how much impact this will have, and what the next steps might look like? Senator, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. First, I just want to push back on what Representative Hall said a little bit.
Sure.
I think the governor's taking a smart approach into reopening the economy. There are some counties that just frankly haven't even had any cases of COVID-19, and I don't know why it would make any sense to keep these restrictions in place for, a county that hasn't even seen one case yet. When you look at the data that is available on the state's COVID-19 website, it shows that right now there are 300 COVID-19 patients who are hospitalized. We still have 4,234 beds available. 100 people are in ICUs. We have 556 ICU units available. 58 patients are on ventilators. We have 699 ventilators available. So there is some slack in those areas. I do understand we need to be careful with our PPE and making sure that we have enough on hand for our frontline healthcare workers to manage people. But I think this targeted approach is a smart way to go. In terms of budget numbers, we really don't know yet what the total impact is going to be. Personally, I would like to see the Revenue Estimating Conference meet again before we set our final budget. The best, or really the only estimate I've seen so far is from a Moody's analyst who projected that Iowa's revenue may fall by about 5%, if I'm remembering that number correctly. So, we need to continue to be cautious. And the good news is that we're in as healthy a position as we could be in order to handle this. Our state reserve funds are full. We have a surplus on top of that. So we're in the best position that we could be in order to handle a situation like this. And the reason why is because we've applied fiscally conservative budgeting practices. And we need to continue to do that as we set the budget for the next fiscal year.
How about you, Chris? What's your opinion on that?
Well, with the state budget, I agree with Senator Schneider. The first thing that needs to happen is a reconvening of the Revenue Estimating Conference, because they really, for lawmakers, provide us objective data and a sense of what economic indicators are doing in the state. There is a likelihood that we're going to see a dip in state revenues, and just in the last week or so, we've begun to see that in daily receipts, and tracking personal income tax in particular is starting to decline, and between income and sales tax, that covers the lion's share of where state revenue comes from. So it really does depend if people are out there earning a living and if they're spending their money in the economy, and we're starting to see some of that decline a bit. I would say, in addition to that, we really need to be mindful of where federal dollars are being placed. Even though the state has received $1.2 billion from the federal government, none of that can be used to replace state revenues or help us potentially recover from the economic hit that we'll take. And so we really need to have a discussion with federal delegation and also with each other about, with less state dollars available, are we plugging the gaps with federal dollars, or are we choosing to pull back in certain areas of programming that might not be as critical right now?
What do you guys think the next step the legislature can do to prepare for the return to the, and I'm going to say the new normal, not the normal, because I think we would agree that there probably will never be the normal that we had 2 months ago. Things are going to change for good, and I don't care. We'll start off with Chris then on
Sure.
what he thinks the next step the legislature would do to return to the new normal.
Well, earlier today we received notice that the Legislative Council will meet later this week, and it sounds like the Legislative Council is going to continue a suspended session through at least May 15th. And I think that's smart and potentially the right front for public officials and for government to be presenting the public. I think May 15th and continuing to be suspended is the right choice, and something that I would wish the governor might also consider. That legislative council will determine, I hope with an abundance of caution, when it's smart for us to return. When we can be in each other's presence and taking votes and have enough time to really work as a deliberative body to make some pretty critical choices in how we spend state dollars and what the policy agenda will be for the people of Iowa. On that note, I'd also just kind of push back a little bit on what Senator Schneider said. Yes, there are 77 counties that are going to be reopening for business, according to the governor, but it's not realistic to expect that people are static and they're staying in one place. And if you look at the map out in the state of Iowa right now, and the fact that Woodbury County has this giant spike in numbers, there might be some fairly rural counties around us that have not experienced a case yet, but we need to anticipate that they're going to see cases if we start encouraging people to go back out into public, either to attend events, to go to restaurants that are operating at 50% capacity, or if you're sending them into dense public settings where, even out of the best intentions, Iowans are unintentionally spreading that disease. And I think that May 1st is a little bit early, considering that it doesn't seem to be informed by data that shows it's the right time to move forward and reopen the economy. Let's make these decisions based on data, not political playbook.
I think that's a fair counterpoint. Charles, what do you think the next step should be to prepare for the return to normal?
Well, I think we do need to continue to keep our eye on the data, and I think the governor has been using data and been transparent with what she's looking at to make her decisions. And she's openly stated that if cases do start to increase in an area where more businesses have started to reopen, and the data indicates that businesses need to dial back and some of these measures that have been put in place need to be reinstated, that she's willing to do that. And I think that's fair. I don't think Iowans could ask for anything more fair than that. What I do think we need to do once we come back into session, I mentioned before that we need to make sure that we're using fiscally conservative budgeting practices. We need to continue to do that. I think the fact that we've had our reserve accounts full and an operating surplus on top of that is a good lesson for future legislatures, just knowing that we've been prepared to handle an emergency situation that we didn't see coming when we were setting our budget last year. The other thing I think needs to happen, and this may be more of a federal issue than a state issue, but the federal stockpile of PPE has got to be replenished. We need to have more of this stuff on hand to send it out to where it's needed in times of emergency. And this isn't a partisan issue, because it dates back to before President Trump was president, when the stockpile first was getting depleted. But we need to make sure that we replenish it, that we have supplies on hand, and that the federal government is as prepared to confront a situation like this as the state has been. And I don't think this will be the last time we see something like this. I think we just need to be aware that we could see another virus like this at some point down the road. COVID-19 could have a resurgence later this year as we head into the fall and winter. So we just need to take all the necessary precautions that we reasonably can.
I'm curious I mean, obviously I want your opinion on both of us, is that, I mean, we sit here in this unprecedented time of economic, I mean, the economy really took a shot in the arm. And if this does come back this fall, like they're predicting it will be, how are we going to deal with that? I mean, both as a state and as a nation. So, Chris, you want to take a shot at that one?
In a lot of ways, I think we're beginning to think through 6 and 12 and 24 months down the line. And, even casually visiting with friends I've spoken to a lot of people who just think that the potential for telework and working from home, especially for larger companies in places that have access to broadband, that may become more of a new reality for a lot of different businesses. I think that if you look at historically what has happened in major recessions, in large part, the federal government has to take the reins. They have to work with private industry and also with state and local government to manage the situation, to make sure that there's an abundance of available capital and that businesses are able to eke through the hardest points in the recession. If they can survive the hardest stress points with some assistance, I think that's the smart way to approach it. But the federal government really has to be steering the ship on this. And moment to moment, we're seeing gaps in really having a deliberate and clear strategy, and one that is safe with a focus on public health. So I think 6 months, 12 months down the line, the hope is that we're leading and thinking through it in a science-based way, in a way that is attuned to data. And the federal government has to take a strong role, and state leaders need to speak up, especially if that's not the case.
Charles?
Yeah, I think that what we need to do is make sure that we review the data that we're kind of seeing play out right now. I mean, we're dealing with the situation in real time, and we're making decisions. I think both sides of an argument on this could make the claim rightfully that we're making decisions based on little data. I mean, we're making decisions based on suppositions and projections on both sides. And after this spring, as the cases start to wind down, that'll give us an opportunity to look at numbers and make better informed decisions in the fall and winter. If COVID-19 resurfaces, hopefully that information would help us make decisions if a new super virus pops up at some point down the road too. But for now, we need to continue to test people to see whether or not they have COVID. We need to see if we need to do the antibody test to see who's been exposed to it already. All those things will help us figure out how best to handle the situation later this fall or winter.
So a follow-up to that for you two would be, how do we get this communications and information out to the public? Because I think I'm certainly not an authority, but I've been around enough that I think some of our problem lies in the fact that people are just searching for information and a lot of time just being consoled to let them know that their leaders are doing the best they can with what they have to work with. So nobody faults anybody for not guiding the state, but how do we get the information out? I mean, and there may not be a perfect answer for that, but how do we get this information and communication out to the citizens of Iowa? The legislature has this thing under advisement and is going to work through this. And maybe I'm duplicating answers, but Chris, you want to?
Sure. I think, on the whole, my sense is that the public in my district and in most districts across the state are looking to their community leaders, and they're looking to the governor, and they're consuming the data that is provided to them and the information. We have the same challenge that exists for families and business out there is one that also exists for journalists. And I know many people who work in journalism and media who are experiencing furloughs right now, and that's a challenge. But so long as communities are working together, leaders are providing that information to people, I think they're interested in wanting to find it and consume it. A little anecdote that rings true in my mind. I was visiting with a friend who's a teacher, and she said, there are two types of kids in the classroom, and maybe it's same for the public, but there are the kids who want to know the rules so that they can follow them, and there are the ones that need to be told what the rules are so that you can tell them when they're breaking them. And you give that a little bit of thought and think about the public. And I do think that there are so many people out there who want to know what the rules are. They want to know what is allowed, what's not, what's the best and most safe practice for them to keep themselves out there working and keep their families healthy. The problem has been that there is not clear guidance in every moment, and that there are sometimes mixed messages that are coming from the top of state leaders and the governor's office. If you're telling people 1 week, stay home, wash your hands, but we're not going to put you in trouble if you go out and abuse these rules, and then next week you tell them that businesses are reopening even though the data says confirmed cases are going up, it just muddies the water and makes it harder for the public to really get a clear message and understand what the rules are this week and moving forward. And I think that's something I would still want to see improved, even though we're getting down to some critical decision points.
Charles?
Well, I think Governor Reynolds has done a great job of getting information out there, and I think it's easy to muddle a message, but I think that Governor Reynolds has done a good job of trying to, of actually presenting the right message. And it's difficult to convey sometimes because it's nuanced. But throughout this whole process, she and other governors from across the country have been having press conferences daily on both sides of the aisle, and have been communicating information to their constituents and their state residents. And in Governor Reynolds' case, the counties that are reopening or starting to reopen are counties in which the number of cases has declined or held steady. And she wisely, I think, is making the decision to not start that reopening process in counties where we're still seeing increasing numbers of new cases. And so to the average person, yeah, maybe it is a little bit of a mixed message that some places are reopening while overall the number of cases may seem to continue or bounce around from time to time. But when you drill down into the details and you take the time to actually understand what's going on, then I think that it makes a lot of sense. So I think we just need to continue to make sure that we're getting information to people. The press conferences have been great. The COVID-19 dashboard that the state has a lot of useful information on it. We've seen PSAs on television. We've heard them on the radio. They're out on social media as well. So I think it's an all hands on deck approach in terms of just trying to get information out to people.
How about as legislators, how do you get that information out to your constituents? Because I'm sure you guys are still doing your newsletters and what have you to inform the public. So, has your inbox gone up in activity from emails to you guys, to each of you guys, asking questions on where this thing's going to take them and how we're going to get a handle on it? Has that happened with you guys?
A little bit. At the very outset of this stretch of time, we all were receiving a lot of emails. Mine have slowed, but they're still steady. I think the biggest number of requests from people in my district were really small business owners who needed to get connected to the right places to hopefully help find some assistance, and also people who were filing for unemployment. Once we got through a lot of just getting information to people on those two fronts, the other requests coming in have been a few at a time and much more manageable.
How about you, Charles?
Yeah, I've seen email traffic. Early on, it was a lot of people asking questions and wanting more information about closures and things like that. More lately, I've gotten a lot more emails about reopening the state, wanting to get back to business. And, that's not, I don't think that's to be unexpected. People early on were really willing to shelter and do what they needed to do in order to make sure that they were protecting themselves and the general public. And the longer a situation drags on and the more it can negatively impact people's livelihoods, then the more we're going to get a demand to reopen the state. And the key thing for us as legislators, I think, is to make sure that we're finding the right balance and that we're making data-driven decisions and that we're reviewing those decisions after this passes to learn lessons from it and make sure that we're applying the right lessons going forward if something like this happens again.
We'll kind of wind this up a little bit with your guys' valuable time, but just two more questions. And I know, Charles, you can start it off by what's left to get done in this session and how are you going to get that accomplished? I mean, we kind of touched on that a little bit at the first of the interview, but I'm just kind of curious how in your mind, what's left to get done and how you're going to get that done.
Well, the budget obviously is the big thing that we'll have left to get done. I don't know yet whether or not we're going to have to deal with any budgetary issues for this current session. We may in the RIF budget, because the RIF budget or the infrastructure budget is funded through gaming dollars, gaming revenue. And we've seen that spigot just shut off completely ever since earlier mid-April. I can't remember exactly when the casino shut down. So there'll be some impact there. There may be in other areas, and then we'll need to have a clearer understanding of what the budget picture looks like for the upcoming fiscal year. So I think we'll want to get more information about that. That's why I think it's important for the Revenue Estimating Conference to meet again before we make that final decision.
How about you, Chris? Same question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually just looking at a note. Senator Schneider makes an important point on the infrastructure dollars that usually come to us from gambling. On average, it's about $6 to $7 million a week that comes to the state in gaming revenue. So if you can maybe 8 weeks, you're talking upwards of $50 million in infrastructure funds that may not be there anymore. So I think the state budget is certainly going to be our most important focus when we return. I would think that there's probably a shorter list of policy items and potentially some that the legislature has really put a lot of thought and effort into that we'll have to see if we have the funds available to support them or if we may have to make a longer term plan for it.
I think that's the one thing that has come out of this above anything else. Everything is in a cause and an effect. That you realize something doesn't work anymore, or because of the environmental situation, it's been suspended, and it has effects on two of the things you're not even thinking about. So that's the frustrating part of this. I mean, who'd have thought with Prairie Meadows being closed down, that you have potential of kind of straddling you guys with infrastructure taxes for the next year. So it's I mean, we really are in a lot of ways kind of making this up as we go along because we don't know what the new reality of it is. So well, I appreciate both you guys. I think you guys both made some good points, and I appreciate you guys taking your time. We're all in this together, and I know we both, Republican and Democrat alike, we want this to succeed because it has to do with our way of life in Iowa and our way of life in the United States. And it's not red or blue in this situation. We've all got to make this thing work. So, and I know you guys are all patriots, and we appreciate you very much for the work you do. And Charles, good luck to you in your new role in the private sector. And we appreciate it. You guys coming in or being available this afternoon. So our guests today were Representative Chris Hall from Sioux City and Senator Charles Schneider from West Des Moines. And I'm Bill Peard with the Iowa Cable and Telecommunications Association. And this was brought to you by MediaCom. So thank you guys. Stay safe.
Thanks.
All right, you too, Bill.